budget week in Australia, and certainly Federal Treasurer Labor's Jim Chalmers is very pleased with himself because he's achieved a surplus 2 years in a row when no other government has managed to do that for a couple of decades. Yes, that surplus was at least in part generated by a windfall of income tax and the excise tax most people pay on things like petrol, alcohol and tobacco, not to mention the record numbers of skilled migrants flocking into the country. But according to Jim, it is a surplus nonetheless. Too bad that by the government's own predictions, Australia is going to be back in the red for about the next decade.
Last year, our responsible economic management delivered the first surplus in 15 years. We now expect another surplus of $9.3 billion this year. Yeah. These would be the first back-to-back surpluses in almost 2 decades. But pressures on the budget intensify after that rather than ease. We're expecting a deficit of $28.3 billion in 24-25, but a stronger fiscal outcome in every year compared to when we came to government. Yeah.
Now, bear in mind, when Labor came to government in early 2022, the nation was still reeling from the effects of the pandemic. So getting the budget into better shape than when they came into government isn't actually that high a bar to meet, to be honest. As for why we are going from 2 surpluses to years of further debt, that is because of the huge spending splurge over the next 4 years. A net $24.4 billion higher than the last budget update, which was released in December last year. As the Australian Financial Review's political editor Phil Coorey put it, for his first 2 budgets, Jim Chalmers showed admirable restraint when it came to spending, especially given the pressures that face a Labor treasurer. This time, however, he's like a bloke who successfully dieted for 2 years but crumbled after someone shoved a bucket of KFC under his nose. Aptly put, I would have thought. So what exactly is in this budget? Well, look, it's what you'd expect from a Labor budget this close to a federal election. Rent relief, cheaper medicine, a $300 discount on power bills for every household in Australia, including millionaires who would be the first to say they don't need a $300 discount on their power bills. You'd think in a budget that's supposedly trying to avoid being inflationary, the government would means test a $300 power bill handout, but apparently not, because that would make it harder to, hand out. Although, awkwardly, in addition to Australia's richest people getting this power bill discount, you can get multiple $300 discounts if you own multiple houses, as Chalmers accidentally admitted on Channel 9.
So, Treasurer, does that mean that holiday homes and second homes will get multiple discounts, potentially getting people more than $600?
Well, first of all, the centrepiece of the cost of living help is a tax cut for every taxpayer, but you're right. A big part of it, in addition to that, is energy bill relief for every household. The energy bill relief goes to the person whose name is on the bill, primarily, but we work closely with the states and with the retailers. So the implementation might be a little bit different depending on who the retailer is and where they are in Australia. But typically, the best way to understand it is it goes to the person whose name's on the bill. So if you're renting, it will go to you, because typically when you're renting a property long term, it's your name on the bill, so it's you who get the help.
So if you have got a holiday house, you'll get 2?
Well, it depends on the retailer, but typically it goes to the person whose name's on the bill.
Really responsible fiscal management right there, Jim. Well done. Now, you'd think giving people all this extra money through power discounts, rent relief and all the rest would be a surefire recipe to make inflation worse. Certainly, commentator after commentator has pointed this out since the budget was released. Nevertheless, Jim Chalmers maintains his budget isn't inflationary.
Well, it's a really responsible budget. There's spending restraint in the budget at the same time as we've designed our cost of living help to be part of the solution to these inflationary pressures rather than part of the problem.
So it's what you're not spending that's helping put downward
pressure?
Well,
partly. It's about getting the budget in much better nick, particularly at the front end when these inflationary pressures are the most acute. It's also about easing cost of living pressures in a way that puts downward pressure on inflation rather than upward pressure on inflation. And it's also about making our economy more productive and more competitive and more dynamic by investing in the future.
Pretty but very political words, and I'll believe it when I see it. Especially when Jim Chalmers, who is a regular Klaus Schwab Jr., is planning to throw copious amounts of money at renewable energy, which, given the monumentally expensive task of putting in the right infrastructure for it, makes power bills a lot more expensive.
Our $22.7 billion Future Made in Australia package will help make us an indispensable part of the global net zero economy, a crucial part of a growth agenda which is all about attracting investment in key industries, making our country a renewable energy superpower.
But look, I'm not going to continue to bore you with all the nitty-gritty details of all the irresponsible spending in the budget. I mean, you likely will have been listening to commentators like myself talking about it disparagingly all week. We all knew it was going to be a cash splash to buy votes for a government flailing in the polls. Hello, Captain Obvious. What I'm going to do is focus on one particular element of the budget, which is what Jim Chalmers referred to as the budget's centrepiece, the tax cuts. Now, why is something as seemingly dry as tax cuts, you ask? Well, because this particular set of tax cuts are possibly the biggest con job I have seen in my time covering Australian politics, with the exception, of course, of the pandemic fiasco. By which I mean, Chalmers and Prime Minister Anthony Albanese have sold these tax cuts as fair and for everyone. But in reality, they are robbing Australians blind. One group of Australians in particular, who I will elaborate on in just a minute. Now, Chalmers is very proud of his tax cuts.
Our new tax cuts for Middle Australia are the biggest part of the cost of living relief in this budget. From July 1, all 13.6 million taxpayers will get a tax cut. And for 84% of taxpayers and 90% of tax-paying women, a bigger tax cut than they would have under the previous government. This is about rewarding the hard work of our nurses and teachers and truckies and tradies, and the 2.9 million people earning $45,000 a year or less who would have received nothing. The average benefit is $1,888 a year, which is $36 a week. Our tax cuts are better for families and communities, women and young people. They are better for business and they are better for the economy.
But why he thinks they're anything to brag about is a bit of a head-scratcher. Giving Australians an extra average of $36 a week and pretending like it's the best and most helpful thing ever is a slap in the face to everyone doing it tough. And while, look, sure, I can appreciate that an extra $36 to me has a very different value to someone who's earning less money than I do, still, an extra $36 a week is nowhere near enough to make up for the inflationary and increased mortgage and rent pressures households are facing right now. And to act like they are is just insulting. But those Australians are not the group that I'm going to talk about. I'm talking about what I like to call the middle class Australians, who wait with bated breath every budget night to see just how much of the money the government has stolen from them over the past year is going to be spent on people who didn't earn that money. Ooh, now look, I hate to sound harsh here. I mean, goodness knows nobody likes a Monty Burns.
I'll keep it short and sweet. Family, religion, friendship. These are the three demons you must slay if you wish to succeed in business. When opportunity knocks, you don't want to be driving to the maternity hospital or sitting in some phony balloony church.
And it's obvious there are millions and millions of Australians out there who, caught in an appalling cost of living crisis that is the result of the previous coalition government shelling obscene amounts of money out during the COVID years at the behest of power-hungry state premiers trying to win state elections. And of course, as well, the current government's general fiscal incompetence are doing it unbelievably tough. And my deepest sympathies are certainly with them. But I'm not here to talk about them or for them. I'm here to talk about another group of people. A group of people who, when it comes to figuring out budgets and doling out cost of living relief, are largely forgotten by governments because doing anything for them doesn't generate attractive headlines like Labor gives tax cuts to low-income earners. I'm not talking about rich people, which in Australia, according to the website Finder, means you need to be earning over 345,000 Australian dollars per year. Nor am I talking about the upper middle class, who, in today's inflationary environment, earn, I would say, between about $150,000 and $200,000 a year. I am talking about, as I mentioned earlier, the middle class, who are usually young professionals earning between, say, 85,000 and 120,000 Australian dollars a year, which, coincidentally, is, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, what millennials, my generation, earn on average per year. Now, while that might actually sound like a lot of money, in today's economy and in a country like Australia, which is very expensive to live in and very, very highly taxed, that kind of money does not spread far, especially if you live in a capital city and are paying capital city rent or mortgage expenses and have at least one child. This group of people makes too much money to receive government handouts, but not enough money to be insulated from cost of living pressures and a government like the current federal government who breaks election promises on tax cuts. Which brings me to the point of this dissertation. Labor's tax cuts, as Australians know, are a revised version of the previous coalition government Stage 3 tax cuts. So, currently, Australians earning under $18,200 a year pay no tax. If they earn between that and $45,000 a year, they pay 19 cents on the dollar in tax. From $45,000 to $120,000, we pay 32.5 cents on the dollar. $120,000 to $180,000 is 37 cents on the dollar, and the top tax bracket, over $180,000, pay a whopping 45 cents on the dollar. And that's before you get to the Medicare levy. The Coalition's plan for Stage 3 tax cuts was to eradicate the 37 cents on the dollar tax bracket, up the upper limit to over $200,000 per year, lower the 32.5 cents bracket to 30 cents. This would have meant that Australians earning between $45,000 and $200,000 a year would pay only 30 cents on the dollar in tax, which, from the perspective of young professionals earning between $85,000 and $120,000 a year, is just about the best thing ever. Why? Because for the first time in our adult working lives, it was a real opportunity for us to get ahead, to aspire, to strive really hard for that promotion, safe in the knowledge that the effort would be worth the return, because getting that higher wage wouldn't result in paying an extra 5-ish% in tax, thus rendering the extra money much less than anticipated. With the 37 cents tax bracket gone, the middle class may even have been able to save enough money for a deposit on a house, or send their kids to private school, or start that small business they've dreamt of for ages, or renovate the kitchen to make it more functional for a growing family, or, hell, even take an overseas trip once in a while just as a special treat. It was a chance for young professionals to allow ourselves to aspire to a fuller, more financially secure life for ourselves and our growing families. I mean, after all, we've put in the time at university. We're slogging away in the workforce, paying off our student loans that get indexed every year in a never-ending cycle. We should surely be allowed to reap the rewards of our hard work without the government shoving their filthy hands into our pockets, rummaging around and wrenching out that extra bit of money that would have made our lives just that little bit easier in an economy where earning in the low six figures simply does not have anywhere near the return it had only a few years ago. But then, Anthony Albanese and Jim Chalmers, in an effort to buy a few votes from poor people, schlepped in and spoiled the party by breaking their promise not to fiddle with the Stage 3 tax cuts. Of course. Never underestimate the willingness of Labor politicians to steal money from their constituents while telling them it's for their own good. So what is Labor's big plan for tax cuts? Well, now people earning $18,200 to $45,000 a year also get a tax cut, going from 19 cents on the dollar to 16 cents. $45,000 a year and upwards stays the same as the Coalition's rate, 30 cents to the dollar. But then look what happens at $135,000 a year. That dastardly 37% tax bracket comes creeping back in, sullying the dreams of young professionals of a financially freer future thanks to Labor's greed. And sure, while the threshold kicks in at $135,000 instead of $120,000 a year, over the course of a year, that is not actually a lot of extra money to make. It still disincentivizes us to work for those bigger promotions because the return will just not be worth the effort that goes into it. Gone is the dream of saving more money, of feathering our nests, of better facilitating our homes and our children, leaving only resentment and disempowerment in its wake. Now, to use an extreme example of why this is bad, this is why socialism doesn't work. Because if governments tax working people too much, it disincentivizes people to innovate because they won't see the reward. And while Jim Chalmers might go on about how his tax cuts being tax cuts for every taxpayer,
there are multiple parts of our cost of living package. There's a tax cut for every taxpayer.
they have made the future of a certain group of taxpayers significantly less bright. We are the oft-forgotten group of tax-paying Australians that no politician from either major political party seems to care about at all. Jim Chalmers have put downward pressure on the aspirations of younger Australians, which is the last thing government should be doing if they want a productive, motivated workforce for the long term. Nevertheless, Anthony Albanese was doing the morning television rounds, spooking how clever his government is for giving tax cuts to lower-income earners.
That's why we changed the tax cuts so they're focused firmly on middle Australia, so that people on the figure that you give will be, that you just gave, will be on someone around about average incomes in the vicinity of $78,000. We wanted to make sure that those people were looked after. They frankly were forgotten under the old tax cut scheme. If you were earning under $45,000, you would have got nothing.
Now, for the record, unless you live in a double-income household, in today's economy, earning 45,000 Australian dollars a year doesn't make you middle Australia, which means middle class. It makes you poor. And the thing is, Albo is wrong. Those people earning under $45,000 a year aren't forgotten. They never are. Politicians are always talking about helping people on lower incomes, understandably so. While Anthony Albanese can paint giving tax cuts to people who earn under $45,000 a year as a great act of magnanimity, the reality is those people pay hardly any tax anyway. The focus when it comes specifically to tax cuts should be on paving the way for young professionals to stand on their own 2 feet, to facilitate them expanding their businesses and families, not through government handouts, but by letting them keep just a little bit more of their own hard-earned money. Give people earning under $45,000 a year, people who are really struggling, give them the $300 power bill discount as a cost of living relief, and give the middle class the ability to keep our own cash. But this greedy, money-grubbing Labor government has knowingly and comprehensively spoiled all of that possibility because they believe your money is actually their money. It just hasn't changed hands yet. At this moment, it is tempting to think of the legendary founder of the Liberal Party, Sir Robert Menzies, who, in his infamous Forgotten People speech, stated, "If we are to talk of classes, then the time has come to say something of the forgotten class, the middle class, those people who are constantly in danger of being ground between the upper and the nether milestones of the false war. The middle class who, properly regarded, represent the backbone of this country. They are, for the most part, unorganised and unself-conscious. They are envied by those whose benefits are largely obtained by taxing them. They are not rich enough to have individual power. They are taken for granted by each political party in turn. They are not sufficiently lacking in individualism to be organised for what in these days we call pressure politics. And yet, as I have said, they are the backbone of the nation." Wonderful words indeed. But instead, I think we should actually refer to William Shakespeare's Macbeth, specifically Act 1, Scene 3, in which Macbeth says, "My dull brain was wrought with things forgotten." And so, to paraphrase Macbeth, Jim Chalmers, your dull brain is wrought with things forgotten. The forgotten people of the middle class. We are, as Sir Robert Menzies said, the backbone of the nation, the young aspirational earners who have the potential to drive this country forward, whose dreams are being scuppered repeatedly by greedy, grubby Labor politicians. And we are sick to the back teeth of being forgotten.